Welcome back to the Self-Discovery Files. This is episode 43, and if you're not watching this on a platform that supports video, it won't be anything different for you. But if you are, this is the first video episode that I'm doing. I decided to start doing a video and a visual for, I don't know, it just helps set things up nicely. And I think, episode 43, I think it's time to kind of make that change, make that switch. Welcome back to the Self-Discovery Files. Last week we talked about emotional significance and how does somebody become emotionally significant to us. And although I don't have the full answer yet, I'm definitely still trying to figure that out. It definitely poses a couple of questions that we can now further ask. And so this week I've focused on a question that is kind of after that, which is, why do relationships bring out parts of us that don't exist when we're alone? And so, we're going to talk about that for a little bit and dive deep into that, right? So without further ado, let's get started. I don't want to waste any more time. So why does somebody bring out parts of us that don't exist when we're alone? Okay, you can spend a full year becoming somebody that you respect, you admire, that you love being with. You can be so secure in yourself, and then one person shows up and suddenly you don't recognize yourself or your behaviors or the way that you feel, right? When you're alone, you might be regulated and independent and confident, and you didn't need anybody, right? You're super self-sufficient and you're happy that way. And of course, we still have that desire to be with somebody, to have, human connection. That's just innate. But then somebody appears in our life that matters, or somebody, like last week, they become emotionally significant. And now all of a sudden you catch yourself checking your phone and trying to read into their tone and rereading messages and kind of overanalyzing a lot of stuff. You might want more reassurance. You might count how many times they reach out or who reaches out more, and now you're measuring score and keeping track, and it's transactional, right? You're pulling back to see if they're going to notice, right? And so these are the things that a lot of people experience when somebody that matters shows up, or when emotional significance within somebody starts to arise. And so last episode was about what makes somebody become significant, and this one is what happens once they are significant to you, okay? And the question that I kind of asked, like, was that always in you, or was that always in me, or did that person cause that to happen? Okay, so the first kind of distinction within this topic that I kind of want to talk about is the difference between independence and security. Okay, starting off, independence is not security. They're two different things, right? Being fine alone and being fine while someone can hurt you are two different kinds of tests. Okay, they're two different situations, two different trials, two different parts of yourself that get brought out, right? And when you're fine alone, you can regulate yourself, right? You can do the things that you need to do. You can do the things that are required of you to stay at homeostasis, if you will. But fine while somebody matters is something completely different, all right? Your independence can be real, right? It can be a real strength, right? Independence can be a strength, right? Being fine on your own and being able to sufficiently provide for yourself, being okay alone, that's a real strength. Or it can also be avoiding that test entirely. Okay, some people aren't secure. They've just arranged their own life so that their security never gets checked. And so therefore they call it independence or security or whatnot, right? So what is it about someone mattering that then changes you from somebody that could be completely independent, completely and totally seemingly secure on their own, and then in shambles the next week? Okay? Now, stakes when you have somebody that's emotionally significant, the stakes change what you see. Okay, when something doesn't matter. Take for example, I don't know, anybody that you're not interested in. And I'm sure you've experienced this before. Anyone that you're not interested in, when those things don't matter, when something doesn't matter, a slow reply is just a slow reply, right? You don't take it at anything more than just the face value of whatever that thing is. But when someone matters, when somebody is emotionally significant, when you're connected to somebody, when your vulnerability with somebody has increased, the cost of misreading them goes up. So what do? You read more into less. You read more into fewer data points. Um, you read more into higher consequences, right? And you have more interpretation of their actions and what it means about you. Okay, ambiguity is only unbearable when the answer matters, right? It's the same logic as the needle, and I don't know if you've listened to that podcast episode last week, but goes for anything. Bad evidence weighs more because being wrong about something is expensive. It's the same as the pinhole analogy that I've had. When your world narrows, right? When your world becomes super small, those small signals fill that whole entire frame, right? And sometimes it's not distortion, right? Sometimes they really are inconsistent, okay? And you're reading it correctly and getting told that you're overthinking. So when you do have true situations, and then you have the situations where you're just not secure and they bring out these sides of you, how do you tell these apart, right? When you care about somebody, it means that your emotional state now depends on a person that you don't have control over or that you don't run, right? And this is where you lose control. It's not a flaw, but that's just what it is structurally. Every insecure behavior is essentially a control strategy, right? When you're checking for something, that's there to reduce uncertainty, right? Checking snap score, checking when they last texted you, checking if they read your message, checking their location, whatever it is, right? That is to reduce uncertainty. Okay? When you're testing them on something or testing something, it's to force a certain kind of information out, right? If you do something on purpose or you make them do something as a test, that is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get information out. When you withdraw from somebody, you're trying to leave before they do. When you look at other options instead of this person, you are trying to rebuild a certain sense of optionality that you had before, right? If you are feeling jealous or, jealousy in general, that's because you're trying to catch the threat early, right? None of this stuff is broken necessarily. It's all trying to get control back over something that cannot be controlled. Okay? So if it's structural, if this sort of thing is structural, right? That's this way that you make you feel, is security even possible, right? Or is it just the tolerating of less control, right? Which brings up the real question: do relationships build these patterns, or do they wake up patterns that are already inside of you, already there, right? If they're activated, they show up too fast to have been built, right? If these are activated patterns, they show up immediately because it takes time for things to get built, right? It's not like you learned how to walk the first time that you took steps when you were a baby, right? It's not like the first time you tried to talk that you were fluent, right? If these are activated, then the same pattern will follow you across multiple people, right? These are things that we have to assume if they are. Same thing with it usually is in alignment with older stuff, right? The relationship will give the conditions for this thing to happen, and it won't be the cause of it, right? Because that's what they are. They're just activated. It gives the conditions and then it activates it, right? But if these are created, if these patterns are created through a relationship, you can be secure with one person and then anxious with another, right? It's the same you, but two different behaviors, two different patterns. And sometimes you're responding to real behavior, right? They earned it. Relationships, make new wounds. They don't just wake old ones, right? And through all of this, through thinking through all of this, I land maybe at a place, it's not solidified, but the capacity for these is already in you. Okay? But what actually comes out is built with the other person. The instrument has certain sounds, but what gets played is dependent on who is playing. Okay? But I want to be clear, there's something that my model is missing with this. And it's a straight line, but it's probably a loop. Being protective changes how they act, right? Which gives you more to interpret, which makes you more protective. There's only one person in it, right? Two people are reacting to each other's reactions, right? But it doesn't explain why the same stakes wreck one person and not another. And that opens something completely uncomfortable, which is, you can't know if something's healed if nothing's pressed on it. Okay? If you've done the work, right? If you've journaled, if you've, I don't know, become regulated and felt fine, you did all that, but you healed according to what test? Because being alone removes the thing that triggers you. It removes the relationship. It removes those conditions. And that's not the same as fixing the response, right? Some growth might be avoidance with a better description, a better, word for it, right? So don't let this get cruel, right? The regulation that you built alone is real, but it's just untested in one specific area, right? Incomplete does not mean that it's fake. So if you feel this, don't try to knock yourself and discredit all the independence that you might have gained, or the regulation that you've built while you're alone. No, that's still real. But it's not all bad things that show up, right? Relationship shows you specific things, and I've spent this whole episode listing bad things. Why? Because relationships also reveal, patience and generosity and tenderness, how you handle somebody else's freedom. And if you can't find out if you're patient in an empty room by yourself, right? Some parts of you aren't hidden, they just cannot be measured alone. And so the one thing that I've kind of taken as law is that solitude can build you into something, but it cannot test you, right? Who you are alone is a partial reading of who you fully are, right? So back to the question, okay? Maybe you can't fully know yourself alone. Maybe those parts aren't intruders, but maybe they were waiting for somebody to matter enough to show up, right? Maybe you saying, I'm fine on my own, is sometimes true. And sometimes just no one's testing it, right? And so maybe the goal was to never stop getting activated by these things. Maybe it's to stay yourself while you are. And so I don't know if relationships build these or find them quite yet. And I'm not sure the difference is as clean as I wanted it to be, but I think that's enough to reflect in upon yourself on how you fit into it. So, thank you for listening and watching to episode 43 of the Self Discovery Files. If you haven't followed me on whatever platform you're listening to this on, follow me. You'll get episodes and updates every single Monday at 12 Eastern. Follow me on my socials at the Dylan Phipps. I think I'm going to start posting here soon again. We're re-gauging, and I'm going to actually be incorporating this. So, yeah, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week for episode 44.